Hello, friends. Good evening. Happy to welcome you here at our webinar. And today we have a very, I would say, hot topic to discuss because it remains of a key importance if we are speaking about the sales process. And today we're going to speak about the pitfalls of closing the deals and how to avoid them. And I believe that we have some loyal audience here already, but for those who is not familiar with me, I'm Maria, and I work at Closely, which is a sales intelligence platform. So my overall experience in sales spans over 6 years, and I deal both with B2B businesses and B2C businesses. And what I personally love about sales, this is a great opportunity to gain an amazing experience of communication with different people and different businesses, and require you to look for different approaches in order to solve that puzzle and to finish the deal in a way that would be fruitful both for you and for your customer, for your prospect. So today's webinar will be about one of the most intriguing part of every deal. So this is the transition from the proposal to winning the deal, which can be either smooth, that's pretty much an ideal way, and alternatively, it can face a lot of challenges. And we're going to talk about the stages of the sale pipeline that usually requires most of your attention. What's exactly causing your opportunities to slip away, and what exactly lands on your sales cycle. And of course, we will cover the best techniques and some tips from our team on how to deal with this. And prior we will be moving to the techniques and tips themselves. Let's just bring to memory some of the basic things about the main stages that your buyer goes through toward the buying decision. And we're speaking about the sales funnel here. The thing is that prospects behave differently while going through different stages, and our task here is to understand the main reasons behind each stage concern. So basically, a sales pipeline for B2B represents how your leads are being captured and move through the different stages of interaction until they make a final decision to purchase or until they basically leave the pipeline. Often the terms sales funnel and sales pipeline, they are being confused. So basically the sales pipeline, it focuses on the actions taken by the salespeople during the sales process and the potential for revenue in any given point of time. So I'm speaking about the left part right now, about the prospecting, about qualification, proposal, negotiation, closing, and retention. Those are the basic stages. They are considered as main. And this is all about actions, as you see. And the sales funnel is about more the buyer's perspective. So it's about the interest of the prospect in your product. It's about the side of the buyers, and basically the pipeline focuses on the seller's needs. And in today's conversation, we are most interested in negotiation and closing stages, as those are situations where most deals are stuck. But I would like also to point out that few important things that can be done at the very beginning of your conversation, of your relationships with the customer, they can ease the process down the pipeline. So over here, I would like to discuss a few things about the proposal stage. So basically, when you prepare to present your solution, your service to customer, try to think a little bit about your difference. Try to think, how do you differentiate from other services? What makes your service, what makes your solution different? And why do customers need to choose you, not your competitor? Even if you don't have any significant product features, even if you don't have any significant things in your service or in your solution that differ you entirely from your competitor, just think about other strength points that can add some strength to your offer. So this can be, for example, education of your customers. If you do not simply sell a product to them, but you also share your knowledge, your experience with them, maybe you share the best practices with them. So this is a kind of not service, not solution, but the knowledge, the experience that you share with them and help them in this way. Basically, anything that might differ you from your competitors should be noted in your presentation or at least in your head. And you need to incorporate this in your sales pitch. Why? Because the thing is that when people considering buying some kind of solution of service, they will think about somebody who's different first. So your task here is to create this first impression for them. And one of the biggest mistakes that usually happens during the proposal stage is about the positioning. When you speak about your product, about your service as nice to have, but not must to have, it will be very hard for your prospect to justify this investment for themselves. So if you cannot provide solid reason why your prospect need to choose you and create some kind of urgency for that, then definitely people won't do this for you and instead of you. And I'm in here not only saying some classical things like pitch about your features, your conditions, stuff like this, but also it's about the clear value proposition. Do you save their money? Do you save their time? Do you save their human resources? Just point out the most important things that your prospect will get from your product and show how does this correspond with their situation, because it will be much easier for you to move the prospect down the pipeline once you have created that feeling of importance, that feeling of urgency for them. So this is about the initial stage. This is about the proposal. If we are moving further to the negotiation stage, usually when you made an offer, when you have discussed the basic conditions with the prospect, negotiations come. So oftentimes buyers, they will come with some counter offers to your proposal. They will come with some kind of objections. And according to Chris Voss, which is who is the author of the great book, The Art of Negotiations, which I strongly recommend you to read, negotiation itself is a collaborative process in which several parties are faced with different aspects of the same problem. So your job here is to work with other parties to solve this problem together. And you can negotiate with the businesses to work out a deal that benefits both parties, actually. Some things that you may negotiate may be the price, maybe conditions, terms, and other things. So basically here we're going to talk about some common mistakes occurring during the negotiation stage and how to avoid those mistakes. So the first thing is about negotiation not with the decision makers. So basically in B2B scenario, oftenly there are multiple people involved in the decision making in any purchase, basically. And often salespeople, they try to meet every single person's need because they think that will speed up the deal. They like to make everybody comfortable with the deal, and they would like to meet every person need. But basically an essential part of the landing sales successfully is make on critical B2B sales investigate who is the ultimate decision maker, because you need to know exactly who makes the final decision, and you need to speak directly to this individual or to this team, because sometimes multiple people may be involved, and sadly many people does not understand this, and this is where most of the mistakes during this stage begin. So when you negotiate with somebody who's not senior enough to make this kind of purchasing decisions, it may lead to failure. Why? Because if you have went through all the stages of the sales process, if you have already some meetings, if you have already showed your proposal to somebody who's not authorized to make purchasing decisions, then in any case you will be forced to meet with the final decision maker, and you have to begin this process from the scratch, basically, to present your solution and to meet all the objections. And sometimes it happens that during the initial meeting with the decision maker, just the information that they don't have a budget, for example, or they don't need this solution right now. So it just requires you to go through all the sales process from the very scratch. So how to avoid this? Try to find the ultimate decision maker and try to speak to them directly. By avoiding numerous talks in the beginning with different people, you are in the position to negotiate without sacrificing on the price, on the features, on your conditions, until you reach the final authorities, of course. The second point is about rushing into negotiations early, because Sometimes it's a common mistake to think that the more time it takes for you to solidify and circle all the details to speak with the prospect, the less likely the prospect will sign an agreement with you, for example, or buy your service or product. But basically, the reality is a little bit opposite, and it works in an opposite way, because the longer people are involved in the process of talking about the details, about the conditions, the more suitable is to healthier business environment, healthier business relationships. And you certainly cannot negotiate with the half of the knowledge, as well as the prospect can't. So unless you have all relevant details, it's almost impossible to reach an agreement, to reach the final agreement on which both parties they will be satisfied with this. So basically, starting the negotiations too early can cause problems in a long run. So how to avoid this? As a rule of thumb, just try to collect all the information you need before moving into negotiations. Try to decide what factors you need to know, what information you need to know before jumping into those final conversation, final proposal, and beginning negotiations. Allow some pauses between meetings, between emails. Just allow your prospects take their time and think about your proposal, form their list of their questions or maybe objections to come back to you. Another thing is very important in today's business relationships is about cultural differences, because businesses work in a very diverse world, and decision making which determine either yes or no, it can differ widely from culture to culture, not just in terms of different legal questions, but also in terms of behavior, in terms of beliefs. And you need to understand how negotiations are established and managed in different organizations across the world, in different countries, cultures and countries. If there are any norms that you should avoid or that you should definitely include into your pitch and into your relationships, I would say. Because in an international deal, of course, you need to know exactly who is the final decision maker, who plays which kind of role. However, knowing the roles of the persons, the roles of the team is only half the battle, because while you negotiation with the people, you're typically seeking to influence the outcome of the organizational process. That process can look different in different cultures, and different processes may call for radically different negotiation strategies. So when you work with the customer that differs, for example, from your cultural norms, that from other country, from other culture, just try to, of course, start with the question, who's the decision maker, who decides what, but then just back to the basics. Try to identify what is the approach. Is it a top-down or is it a consensus, for example, for their case? And what are the main cultural differences that may influence the overall process? This may be the time perception. Somebody would like to keep the sales process really long. Somebody would like to finish it like in a few days, for example. So the entire sale process may finish in a week if we are speaking about long-term B2B sales. About the sensitivity, about the methods of communication, what methods of communication are more preferred in some kind of the culture, in some kind of the organization. Pay attention to the personal style and, of course, to the negotiation goal. By negotiation goal, I mean here the relationship type. Is it more about the agreement, or is it more about the relationships, about the, I would say, friendly relationships between a customer, between a buyer and a seller? Another one is handling the objections lately. Nobody likes objections, me neither. And it's pretty obvious that your prospects will always have some kind of questions, like more likely always. And often salespeople, they try to skip the stage. They try to avoid handling the objections, trying to leave them for the very late stage once the prospect, for example, has already signed the agreement or bought the service. So they think that in this case, it will be hard for the prospect, for example, to reject the service at this stage. So therefore, they try to keep the objections handling, keep it till the end. But just imagine yourself going through the entire sales process, Just to get know at the end that, again, the best example that your prospects simply don't have a budget for this, for example, or that they are looking for entirely different type of the service, or they are looking for some features that are essential for them and you don't have it, unfortunately, in your product. So by handling all of those objections at the beginning, you increase your chance to close this deal at the end of the sales cycle. And moving to the closing stage, to that we are most interested in, which is basically the most excited excited stage, both for the prospect and both for the buyer. We should speak about a few things prior we will move to the techniques of closing. So basically at the bottom of the pipeline, of the sales pipeline, there is a number of the prospects who actually get converted into your customers. And this metric is known as closing ratio. And it's arguably the most important metric for any business that handles sales. This is because the number of the initial prospects that your sales team can convert to actual customers determine the effectiveness of the whole sales pipeline. To calculate the salesperson, for example, closing rate or the closing rate of your organization, just simply take the number of the deals that were closed within some particular period of time. Is this a week? Is this a month? Or is this a year? And divide it by the total amount of the leads. At the end, you should multiply this number by 100 in order to get the percentage of the deals won. So you see this formula on your screen, and just like a quick example, let's say that you are closing successfully 10 deals out of 60. So in this case, your closing ratio will be 16%, for example. Why you should pay attention to this metric, as I already mentioned, this is due to the fact that it determines the effectiveness of the whole sales pipeline that you have in your organization, but also you need to compare this to the you need to find out, is this up to the mark with your competitors or within your industry, for example. It's quite difficult with the competitors because this is like, I believe that this information is not being distributed, and available in the internet, but you can definitely find this information regarding the average closing ratio in your industry. So you can also compare your marks in this case. So if it is higher, you can be certain that your sales efforts are paying off. But if it is about like lower or pretty the same, then it's better to take a little bit closer look to your pipeline to understand what's going on and what's going wrong exactly there. And here we come into the most interesting places. So basically you can do everything right during your sales process, but then a fatal error may occur at the end that will that will ruin basically everything. So the most common mistakes that occur during closing stage, the first one, it is very I would say obvious, but it is still very common within the salespeople. So this is getting into unexpected finals. By this I mean being not prepared for the deal. Let's imagine an example. So you're coming ready to your presentation, you're coming ready to the meeting. You have done your pitch perfectly. You talked with the customer, answered all the questions, so everything went smoothly. And at the end of the conversation, your prospect say you, okay, that's fine, that's perfect. How can we start further? And in this case, if you are not prepared enough, and by prepared enough, I mean you don't have exact steps which would you like to move prospect further. You don't have estimated pricing, for example, if this is a kind of custom solution or if it depends on some numbers from the side of the prospect. So in this case, you just simply freeze and you just thought that it's too early for the prospect to move to the closing. So in this case, you were not prepared for the final decision from the prospect side. And this exact scenario is quite common in sales. And you should know that at any point within the sales pipeline, a prospect can be ready to close the deal. And not being prepared for that moment creates just enough time for the prospect to slip through those cracks. And by being prepared, I mean having an exact plan if the prospect is willing to continue the dialogue. So terms, further steps, pricing policy, procedures, people involved, additional meetings, etc. So you have to show up to the meeting completely prepared. So you have to be aware that you may hear yes at the end of this meeting. So you have to be prepared for this. And I mean that you have you need to have outline of the following. So how are you going to implement your solution, or how are you going to implement your service, for example? How are you going to deliver it? How do you plan to communicate with the prospect on a regular basis, especially if there are other people that will be involved in this process? And also, what do you plan on the pricing? What do you plan on charging them? So all of those things, they should be in your head, or better, they should be before you on the meeting, because at any given point during the meeting, the prospect may say yes and ready to continue. And in this case, he throws the ball to you. So you should be prepared on this in this situation. And the second one is about making promises you can't keep. This is very common mistake. Basically, one of the biggest B2B sales mistakes is about over-promising in order to get this deal. Creating expectations that you can't fulfill when times come to deliver your product, to deliver your service, will just frustrate your customers, and they will keep them from coming back to you and, for example, to repeat the purchase or recommend you to other people in the market. So this will definitely hurt your reputation. And make it clear to yourself because before jumping into this final stage, before negotiation about the service, some specific features that the prospect require. Just make it clear to yourself how far can you go with this promises, with those expectations. Because imagine that you are at the final stage of signing the deal, of signing the contract, or even if you already get it done, get it signed. If you tend to oversell your product or your service, you will be in hot water once the prospect realizes that the actual functionality, the actual features, and the actual product or service isn't exactly what they expected from you. So even if you're talking about some small things or details in your product, in your offer, just don't resort to this tactic, because a disappointed customer can easily spread the word around you in the community and bring you some really, really bad publicity. That's why it is crucial to be honest and deliver on your promises on time. The next one is about trying to sell additional features. And if you feel that a prospect has a really clear buying intention, just don't spoil it by talking about all of the features that you have in your product. They could be amazing, but just at this point, you might end up just taking yourself out of the sale, because the client may realize that he is not in need of all those features, and they could be disappointed by your aggressive behavior. So it is just better to leave all of those amazing upsell opportunities for the future, once you will have already established relationships with the customer, and once he is satisfied completely with the existing solution, you can recommend him to go with something on top of that. But just please don't do this at the very beginning of the negotiation, of the closing stage. The next one is about taking things too seriously. And basically, we know that the sales process is not about the pure fun. Sometimes it may be really stressful at times, but both of you and your prospect, you need to look forward for your sales meetings, for your calls, for example, and even to the emails. So when you take things too seriously, when you are instantly in stress, you give off a negative energy that eventually infects the prospect. Of course, they feel this. If you constantly bombarding their inboxes with the messages, with the reminders, if you asking unnecessary questions, and basically if you show that you are in stress during calls or during meetings, just be sure that they will feel your stress, and this would not necessarily push your prospects away, but will definitely affect their mood and their perception of you and your company. So while you might not even realize this, you might give them really bad experience with you, with such a mood. So the solution to this is about being yourself, but by being yourself, I mean leading the sales process in the direction that feels natural to you. Just don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be a wolf from the Wall Street, for example, or somebody that's not you actually. So when you are yourself, you are naturally more likable, and if you are more likable, you create a better energy that prospects pick up on. So they definitely feel this as well. And in the end, they feel like they can trust you. And as we know, the trust is the core of building fruitful relationships between you and your prospect. Another one, the last one here is my favorite one. This is using outdated closing techniques, tricks, I would call them. It's about, again, imagine yourself somebody else and applying those, I call them hard sales techniques, to your prospects. So the problem with those hard sales tricks is that they are, in most cases, they are completely transparent for the customer, and they put unnecessary pressure to the buyer, and they don't work well because of this. I believe that most of you might have heard or read such recommendations like, if your prospect ghosted you, just write him an email and with the text like this. So my manager asked me about the status of this deal. Should I close your file or not? Or something like this. That's just the first example that came to my mind. So in this example, it's obvious that the prospect simply doesn't care about your manager, about the status of this deal from your perspective, of course. So this is a very a technique that actually puts a pressure on the prospect. So the natural reaction to this is the rejection. So this is why those tricks, they look really cheap for the buyer. So please do not use them unless you would like to leave your buyer with the bad taste in the mouth. And we come here to the logically to the practical part and the scope of the techniques and tips that could help you to push the deal. And once I read a really great quote by Brian Tracy. If you remember that a closing technique is a simple way of helping a person to make a decision, you will actually find it enjoyable and fun to practice different methods. And let's talk now about the most effective yet not aggressive techniques. As you remember from the previous part of the conversation, I'm not a big fan of those kind of tips. I'm an aggressive one. So I would like to start with the summary close. Basically, with the summary close, you are recapping all the ways your product or service will work to fix your prospect's problem. By describing these value points all at once, you intensify your impact on your buyer. And this can prove especially effective if you've been sharing information and repeating it over a long sales cycle. So, for example, you speak to the prospect that we have covered ABC points and you would like to reach the following results. I believe that with our solution, you can reach those goals in the following terms and in the following ways. So if we will start this month, we will be happy to offer you 15% discount. Do you have something that I may show you before we move forward? Something like this. So if you are recapping everything that was said once and done before, you show your prospect exact steps for their success and make for them the decision making a little bit easier. The second one is question close. So the question close asks the customer direct and open-ended sales closing questions. We know that asking questions definitely make it easier to address a prospect's concern and cut through their confusion and bring some enthusiasm to the purchase. So at the end of the conversation, when you finished your presentation, when you finished your pitch and answered prospect questions and objections, you don't have to ask something like this, like very straightforward things. Are we ready for a deal or something like this? Just rather, does this make sense for you? Or is there anything you need more before we move to the final, before we move forward, for example, some kind of variation of that. Those questions, they are simple and they help the prospect understand that what you have said, what you have proposed is at least reasonable and it has business sense for them. A great question is also, does this sound good to you too? Because by pointing out too, you're showing that your recommendation already has an agreement with you. So it's natural that their business would benefit also. This third one is assumptive close. And the assumptive close means that you project your complete confidence in your product's availability to overcome prospects' challenges so that you can influence his decision, his buying decision, and close this deal faster. The key to making the efficient assumption and assumptive close is to transit smoothly from highlighting the benefits of your product or your service to asking for a sale. So just a very common example, you can ask at the end of the conversation, so how soon would you like to start with the implementation? Is Thursday okay, or next Monday would be better? So you are already implying that your prospect is ready to get started. In many cases, if your prospect really needs that service or that type of the product that you're selling, they say something like, oh, okay, Monday is great. It will be better for me. But of course, some people, they are more sensitive to this technique. So they will respond with something like, sorry, but I did not give my permission to start. I'm not going to buy this. And in this case, you should just during your conversation, you should evaluate your buyer intention. And if you feel that they are still concerned or have many objections, I suggest not to use this technique because they may consider this as a very aggressive way of communication. This next one is the scarcity close. This one is being used when you try to persuade your prospect to finish the deal faster because your offer has a certain timeline, or there is a limited quantity of some kind of products or services or something like this. So the idea is to create a sense of urgency around your product by explaining any time or supply limitations. For example, you can offer a prospect some discount or additional benefits if they will sign a contract till the end of the month or quarter or week. It depends on your business. And how would you apply this technique? As I mentioned before, it depends on your business, on the type of the what exactly are you selling. Because if this is a transactions purchase, like something that could be potentially bought within one call or one meeting, you typically can say at the end of the call or of the meeting that okay, there is a limited quantity of the product, or there is a special discount that works only a few days, or like Black Friday discount or something like this. So in this case, typically the prospect would like to save money and time. Of course, if your offer is relevant to their current situation, if they really need this product. So this is a kind of a psychological thing. They are afraid to lose this opportunity, so they are more likely to accept it. And the same principle applies to more strategic sales with longer cycle. But in this case, you need to offer a little bit longer timeline for the decision maker, because if your product needs some evaluation or multiple people will be involved in this process. So in this case, it makes no sense to create that kind of urgent pressure. Just circle softly the timeline or the conditions for the prospect. And instead of like saying a few days time, circling a few days timeline or something like this, you may say, okay, normally we charge I don't know, $5,000 for this type of service, but if you will consider purchase during the next 2 weeks, we will be able to lock a 10 or 20% discount for you. So just provide a little bit longer timeline and understand clearly how does the decision-making process looks like. So in this case, the terms may be even extended a little bit. The next technique is called give and get close. And this is about the more advanced technique that involves also an art of the negotiation here. And when you give something and don't get much in return, it will, and if you will keep giving, people will keep asking definitely. And whether it will be free trials, whether it will be add-ons, discounts, other requests, if you continue to give the customer what they're asking for and get nothing in return, it seems like a wrong way. So the more equal you can create the relationships, the healthier they are. So these techniques require you to balance between your needs and the prospect needs. So let's imagine that you have discussed everything with the prospect, you have offered the price, you handle all the objections, and in many cases, what will happen next? So your prospect will come back to you to negotiate. Usually this is a price, but sometimes it can be some additional services or something, some additional things that they would like you to add on top of the existing offer. So what you need to do over here is to explain to the prospect why you cannot give those things away for free, right? Every time they ask them something in return for you. So if they're asking about some free additional features on top of the existing package, you may say, okay, that we will be able to add this, but in this case, you will pay the full price for this particular package, for example. Or if they ask for the discount, you may also set a timeline for them. So yes, we are able to give you a 20% discount if you will sign at the end of this month. So this is also the common example. Most people do understand that there is no reason for you to make something for free for them. So they will stick probably with your conditions once you will try to keep this balance by asking something in return for you. And the last one here is the takeaway clause. So when a prospect won't give you a clear yes or no, they are getting into the gray maybe zone. And one of the best ways to get rid of those maybes is to use the takeaway clause. So if you have some prospects in your pipeline that are continuously asking you to follow up in a week, in 2 weeks, or in a month, because they need some time to make a decision, to evaluate your offer, and it repeats in its repeatable process. So this is where the takeaway clause can make really big impact. So you can use this technique only if you would like to get a definite answer, yes or no, and you should be prepared to hear no in this case. But it is definitely better than silence. I recommend to use this technique once you have been followed up with the prospect 3 times in a row and you still did not get any kind of a definite answer. So they did not ghosted you, but they definitely don't want to give you an exact answer. Is this yes or is this no? So you can say in your email, for example, so when we first met, you told me that you were looking for this particular type of the decision, and we discussed the ABC, and I thought that we come up with a perfect solution for your needs. You may also mention the exact purpose, the exact needs, the exact pain points of the prospect, just to recap in his or her mind. But now, as we are stuck to move forward, I assume that this is not the right time, or I wonder if this deal is still suitable for you. So do you still need do you still feel like you need this solution, or maybe this is not an ideal fit? And you will be surprised actually how many prospects will come back to you with the answer. And I'm not saying here that you will definitely get 100% yes, I would like to come back to the dialogue with you, I would like to revise everything, but the percentage of getting replies to this kind of message and using this type of technique is enormously high, because people, they just want to they also maybe want to put that final point in your dialogue, but they were afraid to say no, for example, or they had some concerns and they just did not have a time, or they did not have a desire to ask all this. So now you help them with applying this type of technique. And so, as I mentioned before, this is definitely better than keep silence during weeks and months. And so basically those 6 closing techniques can be applied in a variety of situations when you need to push your prospect, to push your deal forward. Just try to experiment with them, so you will learn more in which situations each of them is more appropriate. And before we move forward to the end of our conversation, I would like to share with you some of the few tips that could help you in case your deal was at the finish line. So you moved through all of the sales stages. You are at closing now, and they suddenly just fall out from your radar and stop responding to your messages. So no explanations, no answers, no replies to your emails. And that's especially frustrating when this is not about cold outreach, when this is not about just a stage of qualification, lead qualification, but it happened once you have already invested your time in learning the prospect, in learning their businesses, understanding their needs, and naturally invested time in developing a proposal, even maybe negotiation. So the first tip here is to go multi-channel. So often you have one preferred channel of the communication with the prospect. Primarily, this could be email, but I do recommend you to use all possible ways, whether it's a call, message on LinkedIn, or even call to the company your prospect work at. I personally had such an experience. So my prospect changed suddenly the email domain, and I did not have his phone. So I called to the company he worked at and just asked me to call me back. So that worked. So you have to try all the possible ways to reach to this person. And the ideal way to follow this advice is to use an omni-channel CRM, which allows you to seamlessly use all possible ways to communicate with the customers. So, for instance, you have a database with the email and the phone number with the personal information about the prospect, if it is available. So you can send emails, you can send voicemails, or make calls. You can also add this person on LinkedIn, and you can hit his messenger there with the emails like, "Hey, it's Maria. I'm from Closely. We've been in touch some times ago, but I haven't heard back from you for a long time. Is everything okay with you?" So yeah, I mean, you don't need to do this manually. For example, you don't have to send follow-ups, etc., because the system does this all for you. So this is one of the best ways, because you don't need to basically pay your attention to each step. You just have to know exactly on which stage does your prospect is right now, on which stage on pipeline, and you can use all the available ways in the system to reach to those prospects. So this is basically what we are going to do in Closely soon. So becoming just a sale intelligence platform that allow you to engage, convert your prospects from prospects to the buyers. So just stay tuned if you would like to get know more later. And I'll leave the link to our social media at the final slide. So the second tip is a very powerful one, and it's one of my favorites. So it's called, did I make something wrong? Did I do something wrong? So this is one of a bit, this is the kind of manipulation actually, but this is a very powerful technique. So the thing is here that if the prospect does not reply to your emails or messages, you simply send him or her something like this: "Hey, we've been in touch a long time ago and discussed it like A and B, but then something changed and I haven't heard back from you. Did I make something wrong?" And I swear it works really great, because in most cases, your prospect will come back to you with the answer, and sometimes even with the apologies. This is because people just don't want to hurt anybody with their silence and make you feel unprofessional or so. Of course, you should be ready that sometimes your prospect may reply with the actual reason, and this reason may be maybe your approach, because they may find something that disappointed them at some certain point. But it's definitely, answer is better than silence, and of course you can use this feedback in order to improve your sales process. And the third tip is about labeling. This tip was greatly described by Chris Voss, whom I already mentioned during my conversation. And this is a great way to diffuse a tense situation. Sometimes the best way to deal with a difficult situation is to address it upfront. So leading to this technique was, "it sounds like," or "it seems like," and then describe the conflictual situation. Because if you start your phrase with more accusative sentences like "you are," or "this is," for example, "seems like you are, you don't want to continue our dialogue," something like this. So you're just accusing a person in doing or not doing something. So there can be more backlash since you are addressing an exact person and they can perceive it aggressively. And if you structure it with an assumed point, they are much more likely to react more calmly and give you the reason behind this situation. And by neutrally addressing the standstill with "it sounds like," you offer a prospect a safe way to express what he's thinking about the current situation, what he's thinking about your product or your offer, maybe without being actually accused. And this helped people to break through the silence, through the silence or through the some concerns in their head, and move on with their thoughts, objections, and concerns, which is definitely better than silence, as I mentioned before. So, in fact, we all know basically there are no stages in the pipeline that could be underestimated, and you can face delays, you can face difficulties during each of them, but more likely you are to expect some problems during negotiation and closing stages, as those are steps where prospects considering your product more deeply than during the initial stages. But of course, if you have done your work perfectly before, then there is a bigger chance to move smoothly forward, to move to the closing, to move to winning this deal. And before you dive into this most thrilling part, I mean closing, just check carefully on which stage exactly your prospect is currently, because the behavior of the prospect and your reaction will differ from stage to stage, of course. And we are speaking about like those well-known stages like prospecting, qualification, proposal, negotiation, closing, retention. Just try to figure out where exactly is your prospect. So each stage has its own concerns, each stage has its own techniques to work with them. The second thing is about checking yourself with our, I would say, mistakes checklist, the second one that you see on the screen, because oftentimes unconsciously you are making some moves that can affect your deal badly, like trying to sell everything you have in your product portfolio or using outdated closing techniques that may be perceived as very aggressive by your customer. And also the promises, the over-promise in your tool, or just the very simple and very common one, just coming unprepared to the meeting, just trying to to skip the fact that at some given point your customer may say yes to you and you won't be prepared to this simple. But of course there will be some unexpected situations during which you can face with some difficulties, with some delays, and this is where you can try and experiment with different closing techniques, with applying them to your prospects. Of course, you can, it's not about using some one particular technique with a particular prospect. You can combine them. For example, you can use question close and you can use summary close all in once, even to increase a little bit effectiveness. So because there is no single way to close the deal, your approach will be shifting based on the prospect, based on the needs of the prospects, the needs of the businesses you are dealing and engaging with. Basically, we have reviewed the most curated list of tried and true methods over here in order to provide a template for you of what strategy to deploy and when. So when is better to use summary, question, assumptive, scarcity, give and take, or takeaway. So those are the basics that you can experiment and work with. So I think we come almost to the end of our conversation, and there is a room for your questions. In case if you have some, we'll be happy to answer. Just let's check chat. Okay. Okay, seems like no questions. So in case of any will come to your mind afterwards, just drop me an email. You can see it on the screen. You can also visit our website in order to get more a little bit about us, about our capabilities. And I also invite you to join our communities in LinkedIn and Facebook, even for more sales tips and tricks and powerful techniques. As I mentioned, this recording will be available on YouTube, so just sign up to our channel. Thanks a lot and have a great evening.